Welcome, friends. One of the most fascinating texts in the Bible, there's plenty of them, but one is Psalm 82. And I always believed, as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, that Psalm 82 applied to humans, in part, where Jesus quotes Psalm 82 in John chapter 10. We were told that he was talking about humans, right? And now I can see why it doesn't make sense. And once you start to understand what the true content of that text is, you'll get a better understanding of the whole Bible. You'll get a better understanding who Yahweh is, in fact. But you need to do this study for yourself. Now, I've got a couple of scholars who have talked about this subject, and not saying I'm agreeing with both or I'm not agreeing with both, but nevertheless, they do open the lid, and I'm sure that they've picked up on this from others as well, what Psalm 82 is really saying. There is an unseen hierarchy happening in this world, in the spirit realm, and it's good to know as you go through the Bible that this is being reflected in different passages. So these two little videos, I'll put the links down the bottom. I'm going to upload them in part, these two, but please take your time. It's very fascinating, and I think you'll enjoy just the two commentaries that I've uploaded today for you. But please do your own study, be your own scholar, as it were, and you figure out what you think is being said in these passages. Have a great day, guys. Talking again soon.
What is the Divine Council? Now, this is a term that might be unfamiliar to many. It's going to be familiar to others because the term actually comes from the Bible. It comes from Psalm 82, specifically in verse 1, where we read, God has taken his place in the Divine Council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. If you go down a little ways to verse 6, you get some more information. God is speaking and he says to his council, I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Now, with both these verses, there's a little more to them than meets the eye, especially if you're working in English translations. If we go back to Psalm 82, verse 1, we notice that while the translation is good enough, I mean, it's pretty straightforward. God has taken his place in the Divine Council, first part of the line. But we notice that the word for God in Hebrew is Elohim. That's no big deal, again, because we're used to that. Elohim is one of the most common words for God in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Old Testament. But what might be a surprise is that in the second half of the verse, we have, in the midst of the gods, he, God, holds judgment. The second occurrence of Elohim is translated gods. So here you have Elohim occurring two times in one passage, two times in one verse. The first time it is translated singularly, properly, because of the grammar. God takes his place in the Divine Council. And in the second part of the verse, it's translated properly, plural, because of the preposition in the midst of. It can't be in the midst of one entity. And so we have plural. God has taken his place in the Divine Council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. If we take a little closer look at verse 6, where God is the speaker and he says to the members of his council, I said, you are gods. There we go again. We see the same word, Elohim. And that's put in parallel to another term, sons of the Most High, the B'nai Elyon. Now this is one of those terms that you'll see in the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Old Testament, for what might loosely be called angelic beings, other divine beings who are part of the heavenly host. In many cases, many passages, those beings are referred to as the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, or the B'nai Ha-Elohim, or the B'nai Elim. Here we have B'nai Elyon, sons of the Most High. We know who the Most High is. It's God. So this is a synonymous expression for sons of God, which again is frequently used for divine beings, plural, in the Hebrew Bible. Now there are other passages that talk about a divine council. Passages like Psalm 89. And there we read, "Let the heavens praise your wonders, O Lord, your faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. For who in the skies can be compared to the Lord? Who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? A God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all who are around him." Again, there's a little bit more to look at here in this verse as well, specifically in Psalm 89, verse 6. Now, we again can read very straightforward in English, makes good sense, for who in the skies can compare to the Lord, can be compared. And then the next line is, who among the heavenly beings is like the Lord? Well, notice again, heavenly beings is very obviously one of those stock expressions for divine, as in plural, divine beings who work with God, who are part of the heavenly host, who are part of the divine council. Who among the heavenly beings, the Hebrew is B'nai Elim. Who among the sons of God is like the Lord? Of course, the rhetorical response, the rhetorical answer would be nobody. Now, another passage is 1 Kings 22, specifically verses 19 through 23. But if you're not familiar with the backstory of this passage, in this passage, in this chapter, the wicked king of Israel, Ahab, is trying to convince Jehoshaphat to go with him to a battle. And Jehoshaphat would like a word from the Lord. Should I go or should I not? And so finally, after listening to the prophets of Ahab, again, the prophets of Baal, essentially, Jehoshaphat says, "Hey, isn't there a prophet of Yahweh around here?" And they summon Micaiah, and Ahab says in the passage, "I hate this guy because he never tells me what I want to hear." But nevertheless, Micaiah shows up, and this is what we read in verse 19. Micaiah said, "Therefore, hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing beside him on his right hand and on his left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab that he may go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said one thing, and another said another." Well, who are these guys? "Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord, saying, I will entice him. And the Lord said to him, by what means? And he said, I will go out and I'll be a lying spirit in the mouth of all his prophets. And he, God, said, you are to entice him, and you shall succeed." So what we have in 1 Kings 22 is a divine council meeting. We get a glimpse, sort of behind the veil, as to what's going on in heaven. Now, God has decreed that it's time for Ahab to die. But what we see in 1 Kings 22 is he allows the members of his council, the members of the divine council, to participate in how that decree will be carried out. And you'll notice in the passage that these are not idols. These are not men. The members of the heavenly host, the members of God's council, are spirits. Because verse 21 said a spirit came forward and had a suggestion. So we're not dealing with, something really, really weird, like humans reigning with God in the sky. We're dealing with the heavenly host. We're dealing with the divine council. A council that Psalm 82 says are composed of plural Elohim. Another passage is Daniel 7. Now, we're familiar with this one because it's the famous Son of Man passage in the Old Testament that gets referenced and applied to Jesus when he's on trial before Caiaphas. But if you'll notice, in this passage, we read something interesting in verse 9. Here, Daniel 7, verse 9. Daniel says, as I looked, thrones, plural, were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool, and his throne was fiery flames. Now we know who this is. This is God. The fiery throne with the wheels, Daniel goes on to describe. It's the same description as we get in Ezekiel 1, where God is on the throne in Ezekiel's vision. This is God seated, but there are thrones, plural. And we know that it's not just two. The Son of Man isn't seated because the Son of Man will come to the Ancient of Days and then receive everlasting dominion. Later in the passage, we actually read that the court sat and, again, helped God to render judgment. So the divine council, again, participates in what's going on with God's decrees. So that's a brief overview of what in the world is this thing called the divine council. Again, in more familiar language, it's the heavenly host. But we need to pay attention to what's going on in Psalm 82:1, where the academic term really comes from. Psalm 82, verse 1, God, Elohim, takes his place in the divine council, and in the midst of the gods, in the midst of the Elohim, plural, he passes judgment. He renders judgment. Now, that raises all sorts of questions in the minds of a lot of people. So next time we get together, we're going to ask this question and, of course, answer it. Are the gods, the Elohim of the divine council, just humans? Now, I've already alluded to where I'm at on that question. The answer is going to be no. But you would be amazed at how many times you will read that in commentaries, especially New Testament commentaries when you get to John 10, because Jesus quotes Psalm 82 in one of those scenes in John 10. And every commentary on the Gospel of John I have ever seen, and I've seen a lot of them, says that the gods of Psalm 82 they're just people. They're just people. They might give you the other views, but they're just people. Nothing to see here, citizens. Nothing unusual going on. Well, that just isn't the case. And next time,
take a little bit of look. So this is just going to be like an introduction. We're going to be a little bit of an overview. We're not going to get into depth. We'll get a little bit in depth with one verse today, and that's Psalm 82, verse 1. So that's the word in Hebrew, Elohim, and here is the dictionary definition of the word. Right. So Elohim, it is the plural of El 433. So El and Elohim, right? It means gods in the ordinary sense. So people always want to say, when I bring this up, Christians always want to say, no, it's God. How can you justify translating it gods? Because that's what the word means. This is a Strong's dictionary definition. This is the accepted definition of all Hebrew and Greek words in the Bible. Gods in the ordinary sense, but specifically used in the plural thus, especially with the article of the supreme God, occasionally applied by way of deference to magistrates and sometimes as a superlative. Means angels, exceeding God, gods, and so forth. And you can see here, slightly behind my camera here, the plural examples of the word: rulers, judges, divine ones, angels, gods. And so it can also be translated as a singular. In fact, sometimes the word, as we're going to see here in Psalm 82, you'll find in the very same verse the same word used twice. And once, obviously, because of the context of the verse, should be rendered as a singular, and then other times, or the very next occurrence in the same verse, should be rendered as a plural. So, for those of you that are using my study to talk to other people, when they say, oh no, that's nonsense, it can't be translated as a plural, it's a singular word, obviously, you're looking here on the screen at the definition of the word. There's no argument about this. This is a standard, this is not from some cult that I've pulled this from. This is the standard Strong's Concordance dictionary definition. The word Elohim is plural. And, as we said before, translation choices have been determined by context, and the only context used today is that of a monotheistic God. So it is rendered almost exclusively in the singular. Well, this is a problem because it's a plural word. So let's move on to some examples. So here is Psalm 82. And we're going to break down the first verse of this, but we're also going to bounce around this a little bit, talk a little bit about the whole chapter here. This is the entire chapter of Psalm 82. It's very short, as you can see. It takes you about 40 seconds to read. And I really encourage you to read this and to see you cannot justify the arguments that some make. Now, you've probably never heard of this verse before. I know up until several years ago, I'd never heard of it before. And, obviously I'd read it, but you tend to, as a Christian, there's some kind of a mental block, and you just don't see these things. You don't consider them because they go against what you know to be true. But I know this is true. No, but I know this is true, right? And so we get stuck into this quagmire where we can't get away from the indoctrination that we've received from other religious people. So let's take a look at this. God, Elohim, has taken his place in the divine council in the midst of the gods, Elohim, right? So this is what I was saying. The word Elohim is used twice here in one sentence, and it's used first as a singular and then as a plural, and it's obvious as to why, because of the context, because there is a Elohim that has taken his place. He's standing here, an individual is now standing, so we know then that it's a singular. He's taken his place in the divine council. This is the English Standard Version. I'm very happy they translated that as the divine council, though there is a better translation. We'll get to that in a moment. In the midst of the gods, Elohim, he holds judgment. And he says, quoting, "How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute." I have to look at my other screen here. My camera is right here in the middle of the screen, so it blocks part of the screen. "Rescue the weak and needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations." Now, if you just take this just at face value, it really throws a wrench in the entire Christian narrative. Like, what on earth is going on here? Isn't Yeshua the Son of the Most High? Isn't he exclusively the Son of the Most High? But here is a God talking to other gods, and he says, specifically here, verse 6, "I said, you are gods, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men you shall die." Some people want to say, well, this is talking about men, this is not talking about gods. Well, that's contradicted by the text itself, because it says, "Nevertheless, like men you shall die." Other translations put it a little stronger. They say, "Nevertheless, like humans you shall die," or "you shall die like a human and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for you shall inherit all the nations." So this is Psalm 82. It really throws a spanner into the Christian narrative, and I want you to read it, become aware of it, and you'll start to see a lot of these. As I said, there's just an introduction, which is a scattering of verses we're going to go through today that talk about the plurality of God, the Elohim. But if you start to read your Bible, not just listen to what other people tell you it says, including moi, but you read the Bible, as I just love encouraging people to do, you will start to see that these kinds of verses are reframe and recontextualize the rest of the biblical text and will make sense of things in a way that it couldn't before. Let's look at another example, Genesis 1:26. Now, one of the most famous verses in the whole Bible. "Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness." Now, for anyone who's nitpicking, yes, it's just the first half of Genesis 1:26. The rest of it talks about them having dominion over the earth, so it's not needed for this. "Then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness." Do you notice any problem with this sentence straight off? If you're an English teacher, then it's going to be pretty obvious. Right? It's like, wait, hang on a second. Then God, singular, said, let us. Wait, what? Hang on. Singular said, let us. No, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Then God, singular, said, let us, plural, make man in our plural image, after our plural likeness. Singular, plural, plural, plural. Well, that doesn't work. No, it doesn't. And there's a reason for this. And so we're going to look at these notes here in a second. You know, I know that people are going to criticize this study. I think they're going to criticize them all, right? So that's fine. But when you actually start to look at this word and how real Bible scholars, not just me, but people that have been involved in real Bible translation, have really wrestled with the way they translate this. Why? Because they know they can't translate it this way justifiably. And you're going to see that when we get to their notes. They struggle with the fact that we have to find some reason to justifiably translate Genesis 1:26 in the plural form instead of the singular form. But they won't do it. They haven't done it, as you can see. And the reason they won't is because they can't let go of this idea of a monotheistic God. And that's just not the case. It's not what the Bible teaches. So, now you do have a lying God that that has set himself up above the gods and says he's the supreme being, right? We've talked about that in other studies, so we won't get too much into it here. We probably will right at the end. So how should that be translated? Well, it should be translated, then the gods said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Well, then it flows, right? Plural, 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 plural. Then we've got Yahweh's conversation with the Elohim. Now, when Yahweh's name is used in Genesis, we find the word Elohim used then Yahweh's proper name, the Tetragrammaton, right? YHWH. In your King James Bible, it's wrongly translated as Jehovah. Well, there was no J sound, so we know that's wrong right off the bat. But and there's not really a whole lot of point. Some people have sent me stuff on all God's names and all of this kind of stuff, and you've got to look at the Kabbalah and all this kind of nonsense. You've got to look for context, right? Remember what the Lord said. You search the Scripture, for in them you think you find words of eternal life. Yet they bear witness of me, and you miss it. So, all right. So here's Yahweh's conversation with the Elohim. So in the text, it says here, I've got it here. And the Lord God, that is Elohim Yahweh. All right, Elohim Yahweh said, now that the man has become like one of us, and then he goes on with what they must do. Now that the man has become like one of us. So, you see, there's some real implications here, because if the man, the human, has become like the plural, well, that means that you don't have a differential God, a God that stands alone from the others. Some might argue, well, it's talking about God and the angels, and we'll see that in the definition a little bit later here. But that can't be the case. Because how does the human become both like the God and like the angels, which are completely different from each other according to the Christian narrative? Right? Now that the man has become like one of us, who's he talking to? Well, he can't be talking to the angels, because I just explained why. So who is he talking to? He's talking to the Elohim. The Elohim is plural. It's a collection. It's the gods. It's not a singular God. Right? So, the Elohim is the divine council. And we're going to break down here Psalm 82, because this is one of the most amazing demonstrations of the divine council in the text. So let's just read this Psalm 82 verse 1 again, and we'll go through. And let me just hide all of these for a second. So God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods, he holds judgment. Psalm 82, verse 1. I encourage you to compare different translations of the Bible. You see all of them say this just very slightly differently, and it's good to probably read 3 or 4 of them to get an idea of what's being trying to be expressed through the text. Bearing in mind, it's not translated... this is translated well, but Genesis 1:26 is not translated very well. So God, God is the first word, right? And so we've broken all this down for you Bible scholars out there that want to, and I encourage you all to be, scholar just means student, right? So I encourage you all to become Bible scholars. I know not all of you can. You've got lives and kids to raise and all this kind of thing, but there's some of you. There's some of you that can start to take Bible study seriously and become a genuine student of the biblical text, right? Really important, and I could use the help. I really could. So, God, Elohim, and that's the Hebrew word there, and that's the Strong's number.